So when I was at university, I one of the first books I read was about understanding sales by everything you know about baseball. And one me and my one of my colleagues, he was from Japan. We both bought the books, and he just told me, "Look, because I'm Japanese, we play a lot of baseball. I'm going to understand sales way better than you." Then it turned out that at the end of the path of the month, I was the one who got the most out of the book. And so,
That's fun.
and that was just a fan fact. And I'm happy to have here today on the podcast Dave Kurlan, author of Baseline Selling and founder of a lot of other things that we will understand a little bit more now. So thank you for being here, Dave, and
Thanks for inviting me.
nice to meet you first. So just a
Likewise.
just a quick one from me. I reached out because we have some ideas in common, and I mean I've been following you since a lot of time, and I've been reading your books, blogs, website, and I've been interested in the topic of SDR BDR model, which is a topic I already discussed with David Brock, Brent Adamson, but also Darius Lotifard a few weeks ago about full
David
sales.
Brock and I are very like-minded on things.
I know. And they suggested me to reach out to you, and they said it's such a great idea. And I just wanted to discuss this with you. But before we start, I know the vast majority of my audience know who you are, but if you want to give us a little bit of, background, what you do, what you've done for the world of selling.
Okay, I'm a sales guy. I've been in sales since 1973. So obviously, that's 50 years in the profession. That's a long time. While I've been in the profession, I wrote a bunch of books. I've founded two companies. One of them is Kurlan and Associates, which is a global sales consultancy. So we do some of the traditional things like sales training and sales coaching and sales process and consulting. And the other is Objective Management Group, which was the world's leading provider of sales team analyses and sales candidate assessments. And at OMG, uh, we've assessed over 2.3 million salespeople. So we have, from a data standpoint, 2.3 million rows of data and 450 columns on each salesperson. So that comes out to billions of data points. And since you've been reading the blog, I don't know if you've been reading it for all 17 years that I've been writing it, but I often write and then back up everything I say with data from OMG.
And thanks for this kind of overview. And it's pretty, for me, it's pretty crazy that you started your first company in 1985 when honestly I was not even born. It's okay, but I don't think there was that much sales training out there. And that so the first question I want to ask you is how difficult it was, and like what kind of major challenges did you face? Because I imagine you going there 1985 doing that thing and people thinking you were kind of crazy or something like that.
Well, the biggest challenge I had in 1985 was that I was 30 years old and I looked 20. So I had a credibility problem. And I had come out of the music industry where I had a business and I was selling. Um, and I didn't dress right either. So I had all kinds of barriers that I created for myself that I had to overcome every time I met with somebody. So it took me a couple of years to figure out how I needed to present myself and how I needed to sound. You have from a United States standpoint, you have an Italian accent, but in Italy, it's just fine, right? You belong. I'm in central Massachusetts in the United States, outside of Boston, and I had a Boston accent, and that didn't work very well once you got outside of Boston. So I had to learn how to speak differently as well. As you might try to perfect your English, I had to perfect my English because it didn't work outside of my local area. So those were the early challenges I had. It wasn't that people were resistant to sales training or sales coaching. It was they were resistant to me.
And it's such a fun and crazy thing, for me to just understand how people started moving the sales training world. And you wrote the first book in 2005, 2006. I don't remember the year, the exact year. Baseline selling, which was at that time a game changer.
That was my
Started
second book.
your second book, yeah, sorry, and it was kind of advertised really well at the top level, between C levels, between a lot of newspapers, which probably didn't even talk about sales training at that time. And the cool thing about that book, when I read it now, I often read it, and is that it's not only sales tactics, it's sales strategy, it's sales mindset, it's sales thinking. It's way more than a sales training book. And how did you come up with the baseball idea?
That's a great question. Um, baseball, it's not a common sport in Italy, I understand, but I was born into baseball. And I was born a Boston Red Sox fan. And as much as I can't stand them these days, I can't help it. That's my team. And so baseball is always at the top of my list, and selling's always been at the top of my list. So I was like, well, what would happen if we put the two things together and just merge them? And sales processes were often 4 stages, sometimes 5 or 6. And that worked perfectly with the 4 bases on a baseball diamond. And I loved the idea of being able to illustrate a sales process visually. Up until that time, there wasn't a visual representation for what a sales process or a pipeline should look like. They were just concepts. And I knew that the few other sales processes that were out there were either too complicated or they had holes in them. They were missing pieces, missing milestones, missing stages. And some of the popular sales books and trainings that were out there at the time, like spin selling and solution selling, um, they weren't sales processes. They were just approaches, which inside of baseline selling took place between first and second base. So they weren't complete either. So and I'm also a student of sales history. I have read every, I can't say I'm reading every book that's written today, but I had read every book that was written before I wrote Baseline Selling. And I've got sources for everything that I put in baseline selling with the original authors from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, when some of these brilliant people were coming up with these ideas. So that's all incorporated into the book. So I liked to think of baseline selling as the first totally complete book on sales, where it didn't just talk about closing, and it didn't just talk about prospecting, and it didn't just talk about a winning mindset, and it didn't just have a few cool tactics in it, but it had everything a salesperson needed to either learn to sell or get better at selling.
And I think
Here's
it
some baseball.
and I think all this it is what makes this book actual still nowadays. Like if I take a look, like the book now in a few years will turn 20, so we can
Right?
say this, and the
That's right.
book is still actual. So I still suggested, like people of my business unit still read it. So I think that this kind of general approach, like from the top, like this kind of bird's eye view, was really at that time was kind of really innovation, because it put a step forward into your methodology.
Hmm.
And but you know that this is not the reason why I'm reaching out, as I said at the beginning
Yeah,
of
you
the
want to talk
podcast.
about BDRs.
I want to talk about BDRs because I talked with David about it. David said, reach out to Dave. He has kind of the same ideas. And I think that 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, I read on your blog something similar to what David was talking about, an article that I will send then to the, let's see, listeners via newsletter. I will post it, advertise it. And it was called "Why I Believe We Should Blow Up the BDR Role in Sales," and
I
it was
remember
really
that.
it was really forward at that time for me. And in the article, you say that the tech industry is doing what other industries were doing years and years ago. And I work in the tech industry, and I start questioning myself. I said, are we really building the future? You know what I mean? If we do things that people were doing 20 years ago, and you focus on in the article, you focus on, uh, all this great turnover, that all this big turnover that we have in the sales profession. And you kind of approach this problem by saying that the BDR is one of the reason why people quit, and even talented people quit sales. So my first question for you, after maybe asking you a little bit more of color around this article, is why do you think we still use this model?
Somebody came up with the idea that salespeople, good salespeople, shouldn't be wasting their time making cold calls. And they would be much better served if all they did was show up for meetings. And on paper, that makes sense, right? Why would I want my best salesperson sitting on the phone making cold calls? So if not my best salesperson making cold calls, who then? So somebody else came up with the idea. Let's recruit a bunch of kids out of school and put them on the phone. Another great idea on paper. But it hasn't worked, really. These BDR teams are huge. Why? Not because they're doing so well, it's because they're doing so poorly. The third idea that was born out of this was, and our BDRs could be bench strength. These are the people who we could convert into account executive positions and account management positions. So there are a bunch of problems with this. And by the way, I just got a notification that popped up on my computer screen that there are local power outages from the severe thunderstorms that are coming through here. So if I suddenly go poof and I'm gone, you'll know why. And it wasn't that I wasn't having any fun. Uh, so the problems inherent with this are, if you think about it, the most difficult part of selling is reaching a decision maker by phone, getting them engaged, and converting them to a meeting. And who do we have doing this? People who have never sold before, people who don't think like that top executive, people who don't speak the language of that top executive, people who don't have the experience and the wisdom and the tactics and the strategy to get that executive engaged in a conversation. So they totally suck at it. And that's why I think the last time I looked at the statistics, the typical BDR books 1.5 meetings a week. And it just doesn't make any sense. In a separate article, I showed the statistics about what percentage of salespeople reach the decision maker on their cold call. And in that article, it was 11%, but for new salespeople, only 1%. So they're not even reaching the right people where they're failing to schedule meeting. And then maybe a third piece of this is they're not bench strength because most of them aren't committed to a career in sales. They're doing it because they could make money doing it. And they don't like it because cold calling all day is miserable and it's demotivating and it's hard to succeed at it. Um, and they aren't having tremendous success. So why would we want to recruit sales executives and account managers from that group of people? So nothing about it works in practical application, even though the ideas kind of made sense on paper when the people came up with it. And they're still pushing it.
Yeah, this thing is still around. And you know what? I think that you focused on a point that is really interesting for me about, use the BDR role as an entry level sales role. And I think that most of the companies are settling down in that way. So, they're creating a path to become an AE that goes towards closing meetings, having calls, and stuff like that. So, my question for you is, now that we are settled in this way, let's imagine we get rid of BDR, SDR role, okay? How do you think that companies should train their young sales professional, or at least should create a learning path, a future path for them?
That's a great question. And it caused me to think of one more thing that I hate about BDRs. If I'm the guy that's going to show up on a meeting, I want to go up on a meeting that I know is strong. I want to know I'm meeting with the decision maker and it's the right person and they're interested in solving a problem. I, I don't want to show up for some poorly scheduled meeting with the wrong person who doesn't give a damn, but the BDR caught him in a weak moment. Because if you look, when we're evaluating sales teams, one of the biggest problems we usually find in tech companies that have BDRs is the opportunities that they do have are getting stuck in the pipeline because the salespeople aren't moving the prospect past nice to have. For them to make a sale, they've got to get that prospect to we must have this. But they're only getting them to nice to have because the other problem tech companies are guilty of is doing demos too early to generate interest. So they're not only doing demos, they're doing them to the wrong person. The wrong person goes, yeah, that's nice, but there's nothing compelling them to get a decision maker engaged or to get the money authorized to buy it. So the whole thing is just stupid. So what should we do instead? Well, we still have to recruit salespeople into the profession, but it shouldn't be that hard. Sales is a great profession to recruit salespeople into. There's a lot of people who may not have planned to go into sales, but who are turned off by everything else that's out there, who majored in some degree program like geography or history or science where they can't really get an actual job. They're not going to be a biochemist or a nuclear physicist. So the folks who aren't on a path to become a lawyer and the folks who aren't on the path to become a doctor and the folks who aren't on the path to become an engineer, well, let's get them into sales because they'll make more money selling than they would have made with their crappy degree. And let's see if they are well suited for selling, and let's teach them all of selling and not just this little piece of selling, the BDR role.
And that's a good point. And I was kind of brainstorming also with Darius Lodifar a few weeks ago. The creator, the founder of Medic, and he told me that it's a good idea to train salespeople to sell by selling small solutions at the beginning, and then keep them there for, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years. Teach them how to cross sell, upsell, with a land and expand method, and then move them on up in the ladder. So, how do you think this solution can work in the tech world?
I think can work fine. And most companies have a few different markets they're going after. Most tech companies have a small, medium business, they have a large audience, and they have an enterprise size audience. And in most cases, you could put your most senior, most capable salespeople who are well suited for it, calling on the enterprise, and then the next group calling on the large, and the newer salespeople calling on the small, where there's plenty of them. It's okay if they fail and they learn on the job.
I'm a salesperson who still prospects. I still cold call and do a lot of stuff. And I want to just come back to the article, because in the article you wrote one interesting thing that was you focused on how A's can have several different and other ways to generate pipeline. So I want to know from you, just as an exchange of ideas, what can be these new ways, except from the classic cold calling, sending you a lot of emails, forcing you into a demo, and then you ghost me?
Well, there are companies like in the US, Connect and Sell. And Connect and Sell has a very well trained, very professional staff. And they offer two services. They offer uh, automated calling, where they'll take your list and they'll put their dialers on it, and you book an hour, and their dialers just keep dialing your list till the dialers reach your prospect, and then you do the call. The difference is you can talk to between 5 and 7 prospects in an hour, instead of taking all week to reach and talk to 5 to 7 prospects. So that makes sense, to put your good salespeople on the phone with them for an hour. They also have a service where they'll make the calls for you using their own BDRs, except they're well trained BDRs. And again, they'll call your list, and they'll do the heavy lifting and do the meeting scheduling for you. And they're a lot better at it than the BDRs that corporations bring in, because the corporations don't spend enough time training them. So there's two things you can do right off the bat. I think at the time I wrote the article, one of the things that was gaining traction was automated LinkedIn messaging. And um, a couple of years after writing that article, I can tell you that the automated LinkedIn messaging is probably fine if you just want to build connections. But if you're trying to schedule meetings, it's just coming across as spam, because that automated LinkedIn messaging is only as good as how personalized the message is and how on target it is. And it usually isn't. So it just looks like spam, and it looks like an e-blast just coming through your LinkedIn box. So I don't think that's a viable option.
Thanks for the answer. You know what? I was discussing today with one of the account managers that support the region, the unit. He does a small sales, a small up and cross sell, and they did one thing. And then I told them, look, keep in mind that B2B sales is more B2C than B2C. And I think that all these model we have around, like throwing, sending a lot of emails, doing a lot of calls, not reaching out the right person, only increases the level of fear and risk that the people perceive. And this is what is causing maybe the BDR SDR role to kind of underperform if we take a look at the statistics you mentioned before. And the other question I have for you is, how do you think we should train these people? Because now we have them on board. And this is a question more for me than for the audience. So, how do you think we should train these people to at least make them successful in a sales role if they are now stuck in a BDR role? What should we do? Because maybe they have talent, they just ended up in that role.
Yeah. So this is like a three-legged stool. First, we should stop trying to put everybody into that role just because they said okay. Do they have the sales DNA to be able to succeed in that role? And a lot of them don't. Second, there's three parts to being successful as a BDR. One, they need the right messaging. The messaging has to be freaking perfect. It can't be close. It's got to be perfect for the audience they're calling, and it has to resonate with that audience right off the bat. Three, you could have perfect messaging and a person well suited for the role, but if they don't sound awesome on the phone, nobody wants to talk to them. And they're not being trained in sounding awesome. I know that. Uh, Salespeople have never been trained in how to sound amazing on the telephone. So it's really three parts. If we have the right people for the role, their sales DNA supports it, then it's a lot of work on getting the messaging right for each different persona or audience member or market that we're calling on. And there has to be multiple messages, because the same message won't work for every persona and every audience. And it has to be the message that will get a prospect engaged in a call. And then we need to train them on sounding great and how to keep a conversation going. They can't, you can script out the first 10 to 20 seconds of the call, but then they have to be trained on how to just have a conversation. And they're not getting trained in conversations. They're just being given a script to run. And, it's, I know you're not a baseball player, but some people who understand baseball will see this. So here comes a baseball analogy. When a hitter's at the plate, they teach the hitter a perfect swing, okay, where their upper body stays connected. Their shoulders, their hands, their arms, and their hips all stay connected. And this perfect swing where they just rotate around. And that's fine if it's a pitch right in the heart of the strike zone. But if it's a pitch they're fooled on, if they were looking for a fastball and a curveball comes, if they were looking for a curveball and a slider comes, if they were looking for a slider and a changeup comes, they're going to be way out in front or they're going to be late and they need to make an adjustment. And so that perfect swing won't get the job done. So their hands now come into play and the hands have to make an adjustment. And it's the same thing with talking to prospects. That perfect swing is the script to get the call started, but they've got to get the hands going because the prospect doesn't have the script. So they're going to respond the way they want to respond. And very often early in the call, they're going to respond poorly. And BDRs aren't really trained to get that call back on track and keep the prospect engaged and go in a different direction. They need to be trained in flexibility, in all the what ifs. What if the prospect reacts this way? And most of the time when the prospect doesn't react the way we want them to react, it's not the prospect, it's the salesperson, because they sounded like a salesperson. They sounded like they were going to pitch something. They sounded like they were going to try to sell something instead of just showing up to have a conversation and offer some help. So it's being done all wrong. And that's why it's not working.
You know what? Like, I totally agree on this point, and I think that now BDRs, SDRs are locked into the next step. This is how I like to kind of define them, and they are eager to get the next step done, even when it doesn't make any sense, because they have to complete that thing. And this comes back to what you said. They trained on a script, they trained on their own process, but they don't question themselves on what if this thing makes sense or not for the person who's listening. Which is, they're not training the, as you said, flexibility, even decision making on the spot, and all the creativity that we need to do that job. Now I have one last question on this, and this is something that I asked David too, because David said I replaced all the BDRs with two executive, two 500K SDR, the most senior and the most junior, close my deal. So my question for you is, if we get, like, why, more than this, is why do you think companies believe that they scale with these BDR SDR concept? So why is it still around? Are we lying to ourselves? Are we justifying that we scale? Like, I really don't get this.
Well, let me give you an example. A lot of the tech companies that use BDR are owned by private equity firms. And the private equity firms have a model. And the model says, okay, so you acquire the company at this point and you immediately scale. We're going to throw all kinds of money at the company and you scale. And so the chief revenue officer or the chief sales officer that they installed just says, okay, we're going to do what we did at the last three companies before we flipped them. So let's hire a team of 20 BDRs and let's segment our sales team into three markets and let's create all these specialty roles. And we're going to go from 12 salespeople who are killing it to 120 salespeople, most of whom will suck. And we'll sell despite ourselves.
and I'm applying the concept that David says. Like I'm the first one prospecting, and then kind of dropping the small sale on them by following them. And I totally understand even the point of scalability. Now I wanted to touch you with you another point, another important point, which is the sales training industry. I mean, you kind of started the sales training industry,
I can't
and
take credit for that. The sales training industry was in existence before I came along.
yeah, let's say that you kind of spread it in a in a kind of, I don't know, you put it around. Let me put it
I
in this
played a
way.
small part in the expansion.
So let me just ask you this now, because I think that a lot of stuff is going on in the sales training industry, especially with the level of accessibility that everyone has to become a sales trainer or a wannabe sales trainer. Okay, so my question for you is, the first one is broad. So what's your idea on the sales industry, sales training industry nowadays?
That is pretty broad. Well, there's a lot of choices. There's a lot of companies. Some of them are franchises. Some of them are like chains. Some of them are like affiliates. And, you know, those three examples, the franchises, the chains, and the affiliates, there is an advantage in that most of them have some pretty well developed process and methodology stuff that they can share. The problem is the training is only as effective as the trainer. And when it's a franchise or an affiliate system or a license system, you don't know what you're getting. It's not like McDonald's, where it doesn't matter where in the world you go, you know exactly what you're going to get, you know exactly what it's going to look like, you know exactly what you're going to pay. In sales training, every trainer puts their own spin on what they think they're supposed to be sharing, and they don't have the same way with people. They don't necessarily have the ability to get their audience engaged and bought in and participating. And most important, I believe that the only way you can teach people to get better at selling is through role playing. So I can train you. I can say, here's the process, here's the methodology, here's how it works, here's how you're supposed to do it, here's some tactics, here's some strategies. But forget all of that, because the only thing that matters is, how do you have a great conversation with your prospect where along the way you hit these milestones? And the only way to truly teach that is through role play. And therefore, the training is only as good as the trainer's ability to role play the conversation at each various stage of the sales process. So, when it comes to that, the pickings are slim, because most trainers can't do that. They can get up and teach, they can't demonstrate.
And they can't role play.
Right. And there's the second biggest problem in the sales industry. It's that if we're going into a company to do sales training, we need sales managers to do the coaching to the process and to the content. And same problem. They need to be able to role play with their salespeople, because if we're training them, we're working with them maybe twice a month. So that's maybe a couple of hours. So that's 138 hours that they're left to their own devices. So they need intervention from sales managers every day to make sure they're applying what they learned and role playing wherever they're getting stuck and properly debriefing. And sales managers are kind of like BDRs. Most of them aren't well suited for the sales management role and don't know when to coach, how long to coach, how frequently to coach, how to debrief, and how to do a role play. I think our latest statistics said only 17% of all sales managers are well suited for a sales management role, and only 7% are actually any good at this coaching thing. So it goes beyond sales training.
How many of these managers actually coach their salespeople? That's my question for you, if you have any number for
Hardly
it.
any. And what they think is coaching isn't. It's giving them help with a proposal. It's giving them pricing that they're looking for. It's giving them a pat on the back. They're not really doing uh, thorough pipeline reviews. They're not debriefing the call that they just had. They're not pre-strategizing the call they're about to go on, and they're not role playing. So they're not really coaching. They're not making salespeople better. They're just supervising salespeople. Why? Because a lot of these sales managers are still selling. They still have a personal sales role and they make more money on what they sell than on what their team sells. So they're not even focused on the team.
I have also another idea on this. I think that every company should have more than one internal sales coach to deliver on the training that they receive, and this is something I'm not seeing around. Because if I take a look at even of the company's hierarchies and so on, most of them are kind of understaffed. They have only a few people, and sales managers most of the time don't even have the time to squeeze some sales coaching in, because it takes a lot of effort. So I think that, I don't know,
I like
if
to
I
see
think that,
20
yeah,
minutes a day with every salesperson.
yeah, they cannot, like, they really don't have space. Then they have to fill their spreadsheet. They have to have their forecast calls and so on. So I'm
I
really
talked with a
advocating.
company 2 days ago that was the team was completely underperforming. And I learned they had 35 salespeople on the team and only two sales managers who had never managed salespeople before.
That's pretty shocking. I
Yeah,
mean,
how can you get any better when organizationally you're set up to fail?
was it in that way even before, Dave, or do you think that we take a bad shift in the last, I don't know, 15 years?
I think that the way sales organizations are structured is not very well thought out in the bigger companies. And there's way too much top level sales leadership and sales management. They're top heavy. Because, if you're really going to have a kick ass team, uh, six salespeople reporting to you is ideal. And maybe you could get away with eight. But having, you know, 12 sales managers, each with four people reporting to them, that's crazy.
It's out of mind, like, let me just change the topic, otherwise we get lost. One last question for you is about,
We're not doing BDRs anymore, are we?
we're doing everything, I told you. We're just moving around. uh, I mean, we did a little bit of BDR, but even having your ideas on the sales management and training space was important, especially on the sales coaching, because as I told you, I'm really advocating for this sales coach role in the company, but a sales coach who sold in the past and is probably tired of selling, I don't know, wants to do something else, wants to communicate, share what he learned or she learned with someone else.
I
And
think having a full-time sales coach is brilliant. Best idea I've heard all year.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's just put the person there, let him work and choose the right company for according to what they sell, and then deliver. It's nothing more than a program manager for in project management. That's it. You know what I mean? It's, for me, it's
Yeah.
simple. I really hope and
Right.
that it will happen. Last question for you, Dave.
Hey,
Um,
wait a minute. You said that 20 minutes ago.
I'm a sales guy. No, but this should be really the last one, and it's more about your activities and what you're doing, what is going on in your career. Because I read your book, and I just want to know when I will read another one.
There won't be another book.
No.
I don't have the patience to sit down and write for 2 to 3 hours at a time and to not get to the end for a year. That was a real stretch for me to write write a book and take a year doing it. I will never do that again. Maybe a novel, but not a sales or sales management book. The blog, on the other hand, I can sit down and write for 20 or 30 minutes. And, that works for me. And so you'll see more blog articles. That there won't be a stop to those.
That's a really good one. And so, yeah, that was really my last question. So, really happy. I'm really happy to have you here. Really, thank you for coming on the podcast, coming on the show. And I really hope to see more articles, because now you told me that you're not even writing a book. So I will just keep me, up to date with the blog and the newsletter.
Yeah, keep reading, keep sharing, and that'll make me happy.
Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you
Thanks for having
everyone for listening, and talk to you next time. Bye bye.